Welcome back to Cryptic Lore. Tonight, we bring you three truly disturbing real-life accounts connected to park rangers who work deep inside America's first national park. These are not rumors. They are first-hand experiences, events that were never meant to appear in official reports. Across more than 2 million acres of silent wilderness, people vanish without a trace. And some truths are better left buried in the dark. So settle in, because tonight, we're stepping into the shadows of one of America's most mysterious national parks. I've worked as a backcountry ranger in Yellowstone National Preserve for 11 years. Over that time, I've responded to more emergencies than most people will ever hear about outside of news headlines. I've performed CPR on tourists whose hearts gave out at high altitude. I've documented brutal animal attacks where territorial predators mauled hikers who wandered too close. I've stood at the edge of geothermal pools where visitors slipped on wet boardwalks and fell into water hot enough to break down human tissue in minutes. Once, I spent 3 days searching for a man who walked away from his family near a major geyser basin. They eventually found him dead in a snow-filled ravine, killed by exposure. I witnessed a suicide at Canyon Falls, where a young man climbed over the safety barrier and leapt hundreds of feet into the river below. Those experiences hardened me. They taught me that nature is indifferent to human life, and that tragedy in the wilderness rarely looks like the sanitized versions shown in safety videos. But none of my training, none of my years in the field, none of the emergency scenarios I rehearsed prepared me for what I found along Willow Pelican Creek in the summer of 2019. It was early June, right after the spring thaw, when backcountry permits opened for the most remote regions of the preserve. The days were long and warm, but nighttime temperatures still dipped below freezing at higher elevations. This was the season when experienced backpackers pushed deep into areas that might only see a handful of visitors all year. Willow Pelican Creek was one of those places. It sat in the northeastern section of the park, reachable only by a grueling 7-mile hike from the nearest trailhead. Past the first couple of miles, there were no maintained paths. Navigation required solid map and compass skills most casual hikers didn't have. The terrain was punishing. Dense pine forests gave way to marshy meadows where you sank knee-deep into mud. Grizzly territory. No cell service. If something went wrong out there, you were on your own until someone noticed you were missing. And that could take days. The call came over my radio at 6:30 in the morning. Dispatch told me a day hiker had reported an abandoned campsite near Willow Pelican Creek. According to him, the tent was still standing. The bare canister was full. Food and gear were scattered around as if the camper had vanished in the middle of a meal. That alone wasn't unheard of. Sometimes people panic after a wildlife encounter and leave everything behind to hike out faster. Sometimes they get injured and abandon their gear to seek help. Still, something about it felt wrong. I loaded my pack with medical supplies and emergency communication equipment and hit the trail at first light. Recent rain had turned the ground to mud. I moved fast, covering the first 4 miles in just over an hour. The forest was quiet, too quiet, broken only by the occasional raven call and the distant rush of the creek swollen with snowmelt. As I neared the reported coordinates, I began scanning for signs of animal activity. Fresh scat, clawed trees, torn logs. If a bear had been there, there would be evidence. But I saw nothing. The silence pressed in on me. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I've spent enough time in the backcountry to trust that instinct. When the wilderness goes still like that, something is wrong. I found the campsite exactly where the hiker had marked it on his GPS. The tent was an expensive mountaineering model, well cared for and properly staked. The rainfly was secure, but the back panel had been cut, not torn, cut. A clean vertical slash about 3 feet long. I knelt down and examined the edges. The fabric had been sliced deliberately, precisely. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't an accident. Someone had taken a knife and opened the tent from the outside. Inside, a sleeping bag lay neatly spread out. There was blood on the pillow. Not a lot, but enough to suggest a nosebleed or a minor head injury. A headlamp still hung from the tent ceiling. A book lay open on the sleeping pad. Whoever had been here either left in a hurry or was forced to leave. I backed out carefully, avoiding disturbance, and expanded my search. About 50 feet from the tent, I found a day pack hanging from a tree in a proper bear hang. Inside were a wallet, car keys, and a phone with a dead battery. The wallet belonged to Emily Zhao, 29 years old, based on her California driver's license. I radioed dispatch with the information and kept moving. 2 miles east, I made my next discovery, and my stomach dropped. Another abandoned campsite. Older, cheaper gear, same clean cut through the back of the tent. Inside, the sleeping bag was stained with dried blood. The camp stove was cold but recently used. Nearby, I found a permit tag tied to a tree. This permit belonged to Laura Martinez, issued 3 weeks earlier. She had filed a solo itinerary for 5 days. According to records, she had checked out on time and driven out of the park, or at least someone using her vehicle had. At that point, I knew I wasn't dealing with accidents. These were crime scenes. Multiple ones. I called for backup and began documenting everything with my camera. That's when I noticed something else. About 200 yards from the second campsite, a cache built between 2 pine trees, 15 feet off the ground. Well hidden, invisible unless you were actively searching. I climbed up carefully and found a waterproof ammunition box secured to the platform. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, all women, solo female hikers on trails, women setting up tents, filtering water. Sleeping inside tents, photographed through mesh doors with a telephoto lens. Some photos had handwritten notes on the back. Dates, locations, physical descriptions. One showed Emily Zhao at her campsite the day before I found it. Another showed Laura Martinez weeks earlier. And then there were others, women I didn't recognize, women whose faces I had never seen in missing persons bulletins. How many were there? My hands were shaking as I radioed dispatch again, providing coordinates and requesting immediate law enforcement response and helicopter extraction for evidence. I was told to secure the area and wait, but I couldn't wait. As I climbed down from the platform, my radio went dead. Not weak, not out of range. Dead. Black screen. Wouldn't power back on. I checked my backup radio. Same thing. Both devices, fully charged that morning, were useless. I was 7 miles from the trailhead, completely cut off, and suddenly certain I wasn't alone. The footsteps started about 5 minutes later. Soft, controlled. Someone moving through the trees to my west, about 50 yards away, keeping pace with me. When I stopped, the footsteps stopped. When I moved, they moved. I was being followed. I've encountered countless wild animals in the backcountry. I know how they move. This wasn't an animal. This was a person. I pulled my bear spray and began heading toward the main trail. This moving fast, but not running. Running shows fear. Running turns you into prey. The presence stayed with me for 10 minutes. Then the footsteps closed in. I turned and saw him. A man in his 40s, hiking clothes too clean for someone who lived out here. A coil of climbing rope slung over one shoulder, a large fixed-blade knife on his belt. His face was calm. Too calm. I recognized him immediately. I'd seen him dozens of times at the ranger permit office over the past 2 years. Always polite, always alone, always requesting access to the most remote areas. He smiled like an old friend. He stopped about 20 feet away and smiled again. "I know your name from your uniform," he said casually. "You've been looking at my work." I kept my hand on the spray and told him to stay where he was. He laughed, not threatening, just amused. "That won't stop this," he said. "And your radios don't work out here. I made sure of that." He held up a small electronic device I didn't recognize. I asked him what he wanted. He tilted his head, considering it. "I collect women who camp alone," he said. "They think bears are the danger. Weather. Terrain. They're wrong. The real danger is people like me who know how to move through these woods without being seen." He told me he'd been doing this for 3 years, that I'd found 2 of his camps, but not the others. I asked how many. He smiled wider. 3 confirmed, 4 if you count the one I chased into a thermal pool. That was ruled an accident. He stepped toward me. I raised the spray. He stopped. Then he said he'd tell me where they were buried. All of them. Because he was done. I'd found his cache. His photos. Law enforcement would come eventually. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and dropped it between us. GPS coordinates. 3 locations. "You'll find remains at all 3, he said. I asked him why he was telling me. "Because I won," he replied. "And when they finally notice, I'll be famous. They'll make documentaries." Then I heard it. the distant thump of helicopter rotors. I'd activated my emergency beacon earlier before the radios died. His expression changed. "You activated a beacon." He ran. 16 hours later, they found him hiding in a drainage culvert near the east entrance. His vehicle contained journals, maps, lists of names, 12 potential victims. They recovered remains at 3 sites. The 4th yielded nothing. The water had destroyed everything. 6 months after the trial, I transferred stations. He was sentenced to life without parole. I don't do backcountry patrols anymore. Every time I see a solo woman on a remote trail, I think of the ones we didn't reach in time, of how easily evil hides in places people believe are beautiful. The wilderness doesn't care if you live or die, but at least it's honest. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't the wildlife. I never believed in ghosts, or at least I didn't, until my 3rd season patrolling the Blackreach region of High Plains National Park. Blackreach isn't somewhere casual visitors ever end up. It sits tucked into the park's southeastern corner, right where the state line meets the Cinder Ridge Wilderness. If you stand along certain stretches of the Greystone River out there, you're farther from a road than anywhere else in the lower 48 states. The nearest trailhead is 32 miles away. There are no cell towers, no ranger stations, no emergency services within a full day's hike. When you patrol Blackreach, you accept that you're completely alone. Or at least, that's what I believed before the summer of 2017. My name is Evan Hale. I've worked for the Park Service for 8 years, and I specifically requested assignment to remote backcountry patrols. I've always preferred solitude to the chaos of tourist-heavy zones. Isolation doesn't bother me. I grew up in rural northern Alaska, where the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and winter darkness lasted 19 hours a day. Silence never scared me. Empty wilderness didn't either. I'd spent weeks alone in grizzly country without feeling anything close to fear. But what happened during those August nights in Blackreach changed something fundamental in how I understand the world. It forced me to accept that there are things that don't fit inside training manuals or rational explanations. The first incident happened on August 9th. I was on a standard 5-day patrol loop through the southern section of the Blackreach backcountry. My route involved checking designated campsites for permit compliance and monitoring wildlife activity. The weather had been clear for 3 days, and I was making good time. Around 4 p.m., I reached the upper Greystone River Valley and decided to inspect a campsite perched on a small bluff overlooking the water. That site is rarely used. Reaching it requires fording the river twice, and most backpackers choose easier routes. As I approached, I saw smoke. A campfire was burning in the fire ring. That alone was strange. No permits had been issued for that site in over 2 weeks. I'd checked the log before heading out. The fire was burning cleanly, unattended, and there was no tent, no backpack, no food cache, no gear of any kind. Just a fire burning by itself in the wilderness. I moved closer, cautious, scanning the tree line for whoever had built it. The area was silent except for the river and the soft crackle of wood. I called out. No answer. I walked the full perimeter of the campsite. Nothing, no sign of human presence beyond the fire itself. Then I noticed the boot prints. Fresh tracks in the soft soil around the ring, large, probably a men's size 11 or 12 hiking boot. They circled the fire several times, then led away north toward a dense stand of lodgepole pines. I followed them for about 50 yards, and then they stopped. Not at rocks where they might have been obscured, not at the river where they could have washed away. They simply ended in the middle of a game trail, as if the person had vanished mid-step. I went back, extinguished the fire. The coals were still glowing red beneath the ash. It hadn't been burning more than 2 hours. I left a citation notice for illegal camping without a permit and continued my patrol. I assumed I'd run into the campers farther along. Maybe they'd wandered off and would return to find their fire gone and the citation waiting. It was a violation, but not alarming. People bend rules in remote areas all the time, assuming no one's watching. The next morning, I broke camp at sunrise and continued north along the river. Around noon, I reached another designated campsite about 8 miles from the first. As I crested the rise leading down to it, I stopped. Smoke again. Another fire, burning alone. No camp setup. That's when coincidence became intention. Someone was either following me or moving ahead of me, lighting fires at every site along my route. I approached with my hand on my bear spray and called out. No response. The fire was fresh. The same boot prints circled the ring. The same tracks led into the trees and stopped abruptly about 40 yards out. I radioed dispatch and reported everything. They confirmed I was the only authorized ranger in that section. No research permits, no wildlife teams, nothing. I was told to document everything and report any contact. I put out the fire, photographed the tracks, and moved on, but I wasn't comfortable anymore. I'd tracked animals and people for years. Tracks don't just disappear unless someone's deliberately hiding them. And there was no sign of that. No brushed soil, no careful stepping. Just footprints ending like the person had been lifted straight up. That night, I didn't use a designated site. I camped 3 miles north of the second fire, off-trail, somewhere unpredictable. I set my tent in a small clearing surrounded by thick forest and ate cold food so I wouldn't give away my position. As darkness settled in, I watched the stars bloom across the sky. The Milky Way was bright, untouched by light pollution. For a moment, I felt that familiar peace. It didn't last. At 3:47 a.m., I woke to footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, circling my tent. I didn't move. They weren't animal sounds, these were boots. They moved clockwise, pausing now and then like whoever it was examining something. I reached for my headlamp and bear spray, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard. The steps completed a full circle and stopped directly in front of my tent door. Moonlight cast a shadow onto the fabric, a tall, unmoving figure. I shouted, "This is a park ranger. Identify yourself." No response. The shadow didn't move. I yanked the zipper open and hit the headlamp. There was nothing there. I jumped out and swept the beam across the clearing. Empty. No wind, no animals. Not even night sounds. Just dead silence. On the ground, the boot prints circled my tent twice, then led away into the trees. I followed them 20 feet. They stopped. Mid-stride. Flat ground. I didn't sleep again. I sat with my back against a tree until morning, bear spray in one hand and my satellite communicator in the other. I considered triggering the emergency beacon, but I had nothing concrete to report. At first light, I packed fast and moved north, pushing hard. I wanted out. I wanted to file a report that made sense. But it wasn't over. On the fourth night, I camped at an official site near the southern boundary of Blackreach. Exhaustion caught up with me and I fell asleep early. At 2:30 a.m., orange light flickered against my tent walls. Fire. I burst outside, only to realize it wasn't my fire ring. About 100 yards downslope near the river, another fire burned brightly. Beside it sat a figure, completely still, facing the water. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down. The person wore dark clothing, sitting with knees pulled up, arms wrapped around their legs, head bowed. They didn't react as I approached. I called out from 30 feet. "Park Service, I need to speak with you." Nothing. At 10 feet, I saw the uniform. Old-style Ranger wool, dark green, a campaign hat on the ground beside them, the kind not issued since the 1960s. The air felt wrong, cold. My breath fogged despite the fire's heat. "Sir," I said, "you need to respond." The figure lifted its head. The face was wrong, blurred like frosted glass. Hollow eyes. The mouth didn't move, but a whisper filled the forest. This is where it happened. I ran. I didn't pack properly. I didn't look back. I hiked through the dark for 6 straight hours, then kept going. I reached the trailhead 14 hours later, scratched, exhausted, dehydrated. I filed the report. My supervisor listened, then asked about my health. I knew what he meant. During my week off, I searched old records. I found an incident from August 1964. A ranger named Caleb Rowan drowned while attempting to ford the Greystone River in Blackreach. His body was found 3 miles downstream. His campsite was discovered with a fire still burning. The photo sealed it. Same face. I requested reassignment. It was approved immediately. Before leaving, I spoke with 2 veteran rangers. They exchanged looks. One told me every ranger who works Blackreach long enough sees the fires. They appear every August 12th, the date Rowan drowned. No one investigates anymore. Some patrols are meant to remain unfinished. I don't work Blackreach now, but I know the fires still burn, the footprints still circle campsites, and Ranger Rowan is still there, waiting. I don't want to understand what happened. Some places are better left alone. The thermal basin near Ravencrest Geyser should have been deserted. It was February. The temperature had plunged to 20 degrees below zero, and no backcountry winter camping permits had been issued in that sector for 3 weeks. The area was officially closed to overnight use from November through April because of unstable thermal features and extreme weather. So when our helicopter pilot radioed in during a routine flyover to report smoke rising from inside the restricted zone, we knew immediately that something was wrong. My name is Evan Hale. I've been a law enforcement ranger at High Plains National Preserve for 6 years, and I've dealt with just about every kind of permit violation imaginable. Tourists stepping past trail closures to get closer to bison, hikers camping illegally near thermal ground and suffering third-degree burns, people driving off-road or vandalizing geothermal formations. Most of those violations come down to ignorance or arrogance. What we encountered at Ravencrest Basin that February was neither. It was something far stranger and far more disturbing than anything my training had prepared me for. I was paired with another ranger, Mason Reed, for the investigation. We packed our gear and began the ski approach at first light the next morning. The plan was straightforward: ski 9 miles into the closed zone, document the illegal camp, issue citations, and escort whoever was out there back to civilization. The cold was vicious. With wind chill, it felt like 35 below zero, the kind of cold that burns exposed skin within minutes and turns your breath into ice crystals that hang in the air. No rational person would choose to camp in conditions like that. That should have been our first warning that we weren't dealing with rational people. The ski took nearly 4 hours through deep powder and across frozen streams. The landscape felt unreal. Steam rose from thermal vents into the frozen air, forming pillars of mist that glowed orange beneath the low winter sun. The ground beneath our skis alternated between snow and bare earth, warmed from below by subterranean heat. We could hear the distant hiss and rumble of geysers and smell sulfur everywhere. It soaked into your clothes in this part of the preserve. As we approached the coordinates marked by the pilot, we started noticing tracks. Ski tracks. Multiple sets coming in from different directions, all converging on the same spot. We crested a low ridge and looked down into a shallow basin dominated by a large boiling mud pot. Both of us stopped cold. 7 tents stood arranged in a perfect circle around the mud pot. Each one was placed at exactly the same distance from the center. The precision was unsettling. This wasn't a casual campsite. It was deliberate, planned. The tents were high-end expedition models, the kind used for winter mountaineering in extreme environments. But there were no tracks leading away, no movement, no people in sight. Just 7 tents surrounding the thermal feature like some kind of ritual installation. Mason and I exchanged a look. He keyed his radio and reported our position and what we were seeing. Dispatch acknowledged and told us to proceed with caution. We skied down into the basin and approached the first tent. I called out, identifying us as park rangers and requesting that anyone inside come out and speak with us. No response. I unzipped the tent flap and looked inside. It was empty, except for bones. Hundreds of elk bones covered the floor, arranged in precise geometric patterns. Skulls placed at cardinal points, ribs laid out in spirals, vertebrae stacked into careful towers. Everything was deliberate, organized. The second tent held more bones. Deer remains mixed with what appeared to be coyote skulls. The third tent contained only bird bones, thousands of them, sorted by size and species. Each tent was a repository, a collection, meticulously curated. But it was the center of the circle that made my blood go cold. A deer's skull had been mounted on a wooden pole and planted directly above the boiling mud pot. Strange symbols were painted across the bone, symbols I didn't recognize. Below it, the mud churned and spat, occasionally launching scalding droplets that hissed when they struck the surrounding snow. Mason found the journal in the fourth tent. It was leather-bound and filled with handwritten entries. mostly English mixed with symbols and words written in a language neither of us could identify. The entries referenced something called feeding the old breath and spoke of opening the steam door. There were diagrams showing the tent arrangement along with detailed notes about lunar cycles and patterns in thermal activity. One passage stood out. The pact must be maintained every 40 years when the earth shivers. 7 shepherds return to the sacred steam. 7 offerings of bone are required to calm the fire below. If the ritual fails, the mountain will wake angry. We were photographing the journal when we heard it. Chanting. Low. Rhythmic. Echoing through the thermal basin. It sounded like it was coming from the steam itself, rising and falling with the sulfur-laced vapor. Mason and I moved toward the sound, following a narrow path between pools of boiling water. The chanting grew louder. Then we saw them. 7 figures emerged from the steam, appearing like shapes pulled straight out of the fog. Each wore elk hides draped over their shoulders, the heads still attached, forming grotesque hoods. Their faces were painted with white ash in patterns that mirrored the thermal features around us. They walked in single file, each carrying a bundle of bones. The lead figure was a woman, tall, gaunt. Her eyes seemed too large for her face. She stopped when she saw us. The others halted behind her in perfect unison. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the hiss of steam and the bubbling mud. Then she spoke. Her voice carried clearly despite the wind. "You have entered the sacred circle," she said. "You have touched the offerings. You do not understand what you have done." I told her they were inside a restricted area and that backcountry camping without permits was a federal violation. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind you give someone whose words don't matter. "We are the shepherds," she said. "Our families have kept this pact since long before your government claimed this land. We come every 40 years when the earth trembles. We feed the old breath with the bones of the forest. We sing the calming words. If we do not, the mountain will burn. Your preserve, your visitors, your cities near the caldera." Mason asked who they were and where they came from. She tilted her head slightly. "We have no names you would recognize. We are descendants of those who lived here before the roads and lodges. We keep knowledge your science does not possess. These thermal features are not just geology, they are thresholds. Every 40 years, they open wider. We perform the ritual to keep them closed." I told her they need to come with us to headquarters, that we could sort everything out there, but they couldn't stay in a closed zone. Her expression hardened. "If you remove us before the ritual is complete," she said, "you will doom everyone. The seismic activity has already begun. Small tremors your instruments barely notice, but we feel them. The mountain is restless. We need 2 more nights, 2 more cycles. Then the threshold will seal again for 40 years. Mason radioed for backup. Within an hour, 4 additional rangers arrived on snowmobiles. The 7 figures didn't resist. They gathered their belongings, dismantled the skull monument, and followed us back toward the trailhead in silence. At the ranger station, we tried to process them. They refused to give legal names. They had no identification, no licenses, no credit cards, nothing. When asked for names, each gave only one word, shepherd, followed by a number, shepherd 1 through shepherd 7. We held them for 72 hours, running fingerprints and facial recognition. Nothing came back. No criminal records, no missing persons, no matches anywhere. It was as if they didn't exist. The federal prosecutor reviewed the case and ruled that there wasn't enough evidence for charges beyond misdemeanor trespassing. With no prior records and no identification, they were released with citations and warnings. That night, they vanished from the county holding facility. The cell was locked from the outside. No windows, no exits except a door requiring a keycard. At morning roll call, all 7 were gone. Security footage showed them sitting in the cell at 2:47 a.m. At 2:48, the feed cut to static. At 2:49, the video returned, and the cell was empty. No one entered, no one left. They were simply gone. I tried to forget it. I told myself they'd escaped somehow and disappeared. But I started digging through geological records. I found a pattern. Every 40 years since 1872, the year the preserve was established, there had been a significant seismic event within 6 months of February. A major quake in 1912 near Ravencrest. Infrastructure damage in 1952. A massive earthquake swarm in 1992. Another event in 2018 that forced widespread closures due to unstable ground. We detained the shepherds in February of 2019 before their ritual was complete. In August of that same year, a magnitude 4.8 earthquake struck, centered near Ravencrest Basin, the largest quake in the preserve in over a decade. Thermal features shifted overnight. New geysers formed. Old ones went dormant. A mud pot that had been stable for years suddenly tripled in size, forcing the closure of a popular boardwalk. I don't sleep well anymore. I tell myself it's coincidence. That seismic activity in a volcanic caldera is unpredictable. That rituals can't influence geology. But I can't stop thinking about what that woman said, that every 40 years the threshold opens wider. The next cycle will come in 2059. I'll be retired by then, or dead, but someone will be patrolling that basin in February. And I wonder if they'll find 7 tents in a perfect circle, and 7 figures in elk hides trying to keep something closed that our science still doesn't understand. And I wonder what happens if they stop them again. If you enjoyed this story, like the video and subscribe for more. Do you believe the fires were a warning or something waiting? Would you have stopped the ritual or let it continue? Thanks for listening.